There are mirrors we look into every day, mirrors that show us what we expect to see. A face, a body, a carefully maintained illusion of who we think we are. But across cultures and centuries, there have always been whispers of another kind of mirror. A mirror not made for vanity or light, but for truth. A mirror that does not show the skin, but the soul. According to legend, there exists a ritual, obscure, almost forgotten, that allows you to gaze into this kind of mirror. It's not about summoning spirits or seeking the dead. It's not even about magic in the conventional sense. It's about reflection. Pure, unfiltered reflection. The kind that strips away identity, ego, and memory until all that's left staring back at you is the raw, unspeakable truth of what you are beneath the surface. The ritual isn't something found in dusty books or common occult circles. It's passed down through fragmented oral accounts, strange footnotes in forbidden texts, or the journals of mystics who lived and died in isolation. Some call it the ritual of the true gaze. Others simply call it the mirror test. But the process is always similar and always dangerous. It begins at night. Not just any night, but one without a moon. Total darkness is key. The mirror must be placed in a room with no windows and no other light. The only illumination allowed is a single candle placed behind the observer, casting no light onto the mirror itself. Before the ritual begins, a circle of salt must be drawn around the mirror's base, along with a spoken incantation, not to summon anything, but to prevent something from getting out. Then, the rules become simple, terrifyingly simple. You sit, you stare, you do not blink for as long as possible, you do not look away, and no matter what you see in that mirror, no matter how it changes, shifts, or distorts, you must not speak, not a word, because the moment you do, the ritual ends. But something else continues. They say the mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't show you what you want to see or what others believe about you. It shows you what you are, without denial, without memory, without protection. It shows you the shape of your soul. And for many, that shape is not something they've ever truly been ready to face. Some who complete the ritual are never the same. Some go silent. Some become obsessed. Some report seeing their reflections move on their own, blinking at the wrong time, smiling without cause, whispering soundlessly from the other side of the glass. It is not just a mirror, it is a doorway, one that opens both ways. And once you've looked into it, something on the other side may decide to look back. The origin of the soul mirror is not tied to any one place, culture, or faith. And that, perhaps, is what makes it so disturbing. Stories of reflective objects that show more than just the face have surfaced all over the world, separated by oceans and centuries, yet eerily similar in tone. These are not tales of vanity or folklore. They are warnings, quiet, persistent echoes of something older than language itself. Some accounts claim the mirror was never made by human hands at all, that it was a gift, or more accurately, a curse, left behind by something not of this world. In one version, the mirror was found at the base of a collapsed temple in ancient Mesopotamia, buried beneath stone and sand that predated recorded time. It had no frame, no markings, and no reflection when placed under sunlight. But in darkness, it shimmered faintly, and those who dared look into it returned speaking languages no one could understand. Another story comes from a hidden sect of desert mystics who believed the mirror was a divine punishment, a fragment of a celestial being cast down to earth, cursed to reflect the truth of every soul that gazed into it. They passed it between generations, wrapped in cloth and bound in chains, only used when a new initiate claimed to be free of sin. The results were never shared, only the outcome. Some ran screaming into the night. Others begged to be blinded. A few simply stopped speaking entirely, choosing silence over the burden of what they had seen. But perhaps the most unsettling theory is that the mirror isn't ancient at all. not in the way we understand time. Some occult historians believe it exists outside of time, that it appears when it is needed or when it is summoned through ritual, arriving not as a physical object, but as a temporary tear in the veil between self and soul. They suggest that it is not the mirror itself that is dangerous, but what it connects to, a place or a consciousness that feeds on identity, that hungers for recognition. There are scattered reports of identical mirrors surfacing in vastly different parts of the world, sometimes within days of each other, always under strange circumstances. A broken mirror in a burned-out asylum in 19th century Germany. A polished obsidian shard found in a jungle temple with no known civilization nearby. A plain silver mirror, still warm to the touch, recovered from the wreckage of a ship that had never sent a distress call. Each one bore the same traits: no reflection in daylight, a shifting, pulsing gleam in the dark. Who or what first brought the mirror into our world remains unknown. But one thing is certain: it was never meant to stay here. And yet somehow, it always finds its way back, waiting for the next ritual, the next reflection, the next soul to be unmade. The ritual itself is deceptively simple. Deceptively because it gives the illusion of control. A few objects, a quiet space, a set of instructions that seem harmless enough at first glance. But every rule exists for a reason. Every step is there not just to complete the ritual, but to protect you from what lies on the other side of the mirror. It begins with isolation. The room must be completely sealed. No windows, no ambient light, no sounds from the outside world. The mirror is placed upright at eye level, preferably with no frame or ornamentation. The plainer the mirror, the stronger the effect. The candle is positioned behind the observer, never in front. Its light must not touch the surface of the mirror directly. It's not meant to illuminate what's in the glass. It's meant to cast just enough shadow to separate what you see from what you think you see. The ritual must be performed at midnight on a new moon. Not before, not after. The window of time is brief, and those who have tried outside the allowed hour often report nothing more than static reflections, or worse, warped images of themselves that linger after the mirror is covered. Before the ritual begins, you are required to cleanse the space. Salt around the perimeter, a spoken invocation, not one of protection, but of permission. You are not shielding yourself from harm, you are opening yourself to whatever may answer from the other side. This distinction is crucial. Many who have approached the ritual with defensive energy have found that the mirror reacts violently, shattering on contact or refusing to show anything at all. Once seated, you must stare directly into the mirror without blinking. The longer you hold the gaze, the more clearly your true reflection begins to form. It may take minutes. It may take hours. You may see nothing at first, only your normal face, flickering slightly with the candle's movement. But eventually, something begins to shift. The skin may ripple, the eyes may sink, the expression may change into something not your own. You are not hallucinating. You are seeing what rests underneath. But there is one rule, one sacred, unbreakable rule that must be followed above all others. Do not speak, no matter what you see, no matter what it says, no matter what version of you begins to move its mouth, whispering soundlessly behind the glass. You must not answer. Because to speak is to acknowledge. To acknowledge is to invite. And once you've invited it in, the thing you saw in the mirror may no longer be the one trapped on the other side. It's not just a reflection, it's a test. And most people don't even realize they failed until it's far too late. Those who have dared to perform the ritual and stare into the soul mirror rarely describe the same experience. That in itself is unsettling. If the mirror reflected a consistent image, some might argue it was psychological, a trick of the eye, or an effect of suggestion. But instead, what emerges is deeply personal, specific, unique, and often disturbingly intimate. It doesn't show you what you fear. It shows you what you've hidden, what you've forgotten, or what you've become without ever realizing. One man claimed to see himself as a child, but with black, sunken eyes and an expression of pure hatred. A version of himself abandoned by his adult self long ago, filled with rage at being left behind. Another woman, a devout spiritualist, described her reflection smiling gently before beginning to decay in real time, the flesh slipping from the face, while the eyes remained fixed and unblinking. She said she could feel it happening, not just see it. As if the mirror had bypassed vision entirely and reached directly into her nervous system. Some see themselves as animals, snarling beasts crouched in the dark, watching with a mix of hunger and recognition. Others report seeing themselves dressed in strange clothes, wearing symbols they don't recognize, with eyes that seem ancient and far too calm. A few describe reflections that do not move with them at all, remaining perfectly still as they shift in place, as if the reflection has chosen to observe rather than mirror. Most disturbing are the accounts of people who see someone else standing behind them. A shadowy figure, a pale twin, a face half lit in the darkness, always silent, always waiting. These watchers do not act. They do not speak. But the overwhelming sensation felt by the observer is that the figure is not just part of the vision. It is aware. And worse still, the reflection does not always vanish when the ritual ends. Some have reported catching glimpses of the same face in other mirrors, in reflective windows, even in the glassy surface of water. Not constant, just fleeting, but enough to know something followed them back. Those who undergo the ritual often say they leave not with fear, but with uncertainty. The kind of uncertainty that eats at the edges of the mind. Was it real? Was it always there? And if that reflection was truly their soul, what does that mean for everything they've ever believed about who they are? Because once you've seen what hides behind your eyes, no mask you wear afterward will ever feel quite real again. The ritual doesn't end when you look away. It doesn't end when the candle is blown out or the mirror is covered. For many, the true consequences of the gaze begin only after they leave the room. While some walk away thinking they've endured the trial unharmed, it becomes clear in the days or weeks that follow that something has shifted. Not just around them, but inside them. One of the most common effects is a disconnection from the self. A subtle but growing sensation that the person in the mirror is no longer them. Daily routines begin to feel foreign. Familiar places seem slightly off. It's as if the soul has loosened its hold on the body. Or perhaps, as some have claimed, as if the reflection they saw in the ritual is now wearing their skin. People describe hearing faint whispers during sleep, moments of lost time, and dreams in which they are watching themselves from the outside, unable to intervene. Some individuals report physical changes. Photographs taken after the ritual occasionally show subtle distortions, facial expressions that weren't present at the time the photo was taken, a shadow across the eyes, or a strange blur around the reflection that only appears when the picture is flipped. Others have noticed their reflection moving a fraction of a second out of sync, as if whatever stares back is no longer entirely tethered to them. More terrifying are the accounts of reflection bleed. Moments when the version of themselves seen in the mirror appears outside the ritual altogether. In one instance, a man reported walking past a storefront window at night and seeing not his current self, but the twisted, grinning form he had witnessed during the ritual. Teeth too sharp, eyes too wide, staring back with full awareness. He said he froze in place, but the reflection kept walking. In extreme cases, those affected begin to lose their sense of identity entirely. They speak in unfamiliar tones, adopt habits and phrases they never used before, and isolate themselves from others, claiming they no longer feel like they belong in the world they once knew. Some even claim the mirror showed them their death, not as a metaphor, but with precise detail, and that since then they have felt like a walking echo, already departed but not yet buried. The gaze demands a price, and it rarely takes it all at once. It lingers, feeding slowly, eroding certainty and identity like water on stone. Most chilling of all is the suggestion that the version of you still inside the mirror doesn't want to stay there. It watches, it learns, and in rare whispered accounts it replaces. Because the soul is not a fixed thing. It can be broken, it can be mirrored. And if the wrong part of you survives the gaze, the reflection you left behind might no longer be just a memory. For most of its history, the mirror remained a whispered legend, an elusive artifact spoken of only in occult texts, dream journals, and quiet warnings passed between secretive practitioners. But in the 20th century, something changed. For the first time in centuries, reports began to surface of a specific mirror. Not just a concept or a ritual tool, but a physical object, moving through the hands of private collectors, antique dealers, and those drawn to the strange and unexplainable. The first major appearance was recorded in the 1970s, in a small village near Turin, Italy. An antiques dealer acquired a heavy, oval-shaped mirror said to have belonged to a defunct monastery that had burned to the ground during the 1800s. The mirror, wrapped in faded black cloth, was reportedly found in a locked cellar with no access to the surface and no historical records detailing its origin. Within weeks of bringing it into his shop, the dealer's behavior began to change. He isolated himself, refused to speak to customers, and was last seen sitting in the dark before his shop abruptly closed. When authorities forced their way inside, they found the space abandoned, except for the mirror, uncovered, sitting in the center of the room. A single candle had burned down to the wick behind it. The dealer was never found. From there, the mirror resurfaced periodically, sometimes in private auctions under false names, sometimes confiscated during investigations into disappearances or unexplained deaths. In one case, a young woman in Montreal reportedly inherited it from an unknown relative. After months of erratic behavior, she stopped speaking altogether, communicating only through drawings, dozens of self-portraits in which her eyes were scratched out, replaced with spirals or staring black voids. Another unsettling account involved a college student in Tokyo who documented her experience with the mirror on a now-deleted blog. She claimed she had found it in a second-hand shop with no memory of entering. After bringing it home, she began to experience recurring dreams of herself watching from the mirror as her real body moved without her consent. Her final post simply read, "I'm still here, but I'm not in charge anymore." There are even reports of the mirror being spotted in multiple places at once, described in different cities by unrelated individuals within the same week, always matching in size, shape, and detail. Some believe that the mirror is not a single object at all, but a phenomenon that can manifest where the conditions are right. Others think that only one mirror exists, and it moves on its own, choosing who finds it based on their desire to see what should remain unseen. Whatever the truth, the pattern is undeniable. Every time the mirror surfaces, something is left behind. Silence, disappearance, madness, or something more subtle and lingering. Something that keeps watching through reflective glass, waiting for the next pair of eyes foolish enough to meet its gaze. And in a world filled with mirrors, bathroom walls, store windows, darkened phone screens, who's to say it hasn't already found you? Despite the passage of time, or perhaps because of it, the ritual surrounding the soul mirror has never truly disappeared. If anything, it has adapted, evolving to suit a world that now carries mirrors in every pocket and camera lenses on every wall. The warnings may be old, the legends ancient, but curiosity remains a constant. And where there is curiosity, there are always those willing to risk everything for a glimpse of something forbidden. In the corners of the internet where the occult still thrives, obscure forums, encrypted chat rooms, and vanished pages preserved only through screenshots, you can find references to updated versions of the ritual. Some claim that the mirror doesn't need to be physical anymore, that a blank black phone screen in a pitch black room will do, that the ritual has moved into the digital realm, and what once required salt, candles, and silence can now be triggered with an image, a tone, or a specific combination of code and reflection. There are videos on the dark web, known as mirror recordings, which supposedly show people attempting the ritual live. Most are clearly fake, grainy footage designed to frighten or entertain. But a few feel different. In one, a man sits silently in front of a mirror for nearly 6 hours. Nothing happens for most of the video, until, near the end, his reflection continues to move after he's stopped. The video abruptly cuts to static, and the uploader's account was deleted within days. No explanation, no follow-up, just gone. Others claim to have found apps that replicate the conditions of the ritual, using your phone's camera to slowly distort your face until something unfamiliar looks back at you. Users report hallucinations, nausea, and in rare cases, waking up in unfamiliar places with no memory of how they got there. One post simply read, "The reflection smiled first. I didn't." Some communities take it even further. There are scattered accounts of modern covens and ritualist groups attempting to summon the mirror through ceremonial practices. They believe that the original mirror was never an object, but a doorway, a concept that can be recreated anywhere, so long as the proper intention and process is followed. In abandoned buildings, forest clearings, or candlelit basements, they try to peel back the veil and call the reflection to them. And sometimes, they succeed. Not in the theatrical way Hollywood might imagine. There are no bursts of light or demonic growls, just silence, stillness, and then the unmistakable sensation that someone is watching you from behind the glass. Not your face, but someone else is wearing it. It's easy to scoff, to believe that stories like these are modern myths for modern minds. But the ritual endures because it taps into something primal, the fear that we are not what we think we are. That somewhere beneath the carefully constructed layers of identity, there's a darker truth we've spent our lives avoiding. And for some, that truth is just a mirror away. It's easy to believe you know yourself. After all, you live inside your thoughts, your routines, and your memories. You see your reflection every day, in the mirror before work, in the glare of your phone, in the windows you pass on your way home. But those reflections lie. They show you the version you expect to see, filtered through habit, emotion, and ego. They tell you you're normal, stable, in control, that your past is behind you, that your darkest thoughts don't define you. But what if all that was stripped away in an instant? The ritual of the soul mirror offers no comfort, no flattery, and no filter. It shows you what's left when every mask falls. What remains when everything you pretend to be is peeled back. Not your body, not even your mind, your soul. And not the version shaped by religion or philosophy. The raw, unprocessed core of who or what you truly are. It might be radiant. It might be monstrous. It might be something you don't even recognize. The question isn't whether the mirror works. Enough stories suggest it does. The real question is, would you survive what you saw? Could you look into your own eyes, knowing they belong to something ancient and broken? Could you stay seated as the reflection tilted its head a moment before you did? Would you trust yourself again, knowing that something in the glass smiled just a little too long? Those who've performed the ritual say the moment of recognition is unmistakable. You don't see your reflection change. You feel it. like stepping into a cold current, like standing too close to a cliff's edge. One moment you're observing, the next, you're being observed. It's not fear that hits you first, it's familiarity. A strange, suffocating sense that the thing staring back has always been there, just beneath your skin, just behind your eyes, waiting. And maybe that's the most unsettling truth of all. That the mirror doesn't show you something new. It reveals what was always there. What you've buried, what you've rewritten, what you've convinced yourself isn't real. But once it's seen, once the reflection solidifies, you can't forget it. You can't undo it. And every mirror you look into after will carry a trace of that moment, as if your soul has been split between glass and flesh, and you're never quite sure which side you're standing on. So, ask yourself, not as a skeptic, not as a believer, but as a human being. If you sat alone in that dark room, candle flickering behind you, silence pressing in from all sides, would you dare to look? And more importantly, if something else looked back, would you even know it wasn't you? There's a moment, just before the candle burns out, when everything feels still. The room goes quiet, the air grows thick, and the mirror seems to lose its surface. No longer glass, but something deeper, like water frozen in time. It's in that silence that the real question begins to form. Not what did you see, but who was looking back? And were those eyes truly yours? Because for some who've performed the ritual, the shift isn't immediate. It's subtle. A sense that their reflection no longer feels familiar, that the timing of a blink is off, or a smile appears before their lips begin to move. Most brush it off, blame it on nerves or imagination. But as the days go by, they begin to notice more. The reflection grows bold. It begins to follow them, not through footsteps, but through moments. It stares too long. It twitches when they don't. It lingers even after they turn away. And sometimes, it doesn't stay in the mirror. There are stories, rare, whispered, and terrifying, of people who swear their reflection stepped out. Not literally, not in a burst of smoke and shattered glass, but spiritually, slowly, one behavior at a time, a change in voice, a look in the eye that others notice but can't explain, a growing sense that the person who came back from the ritual is not the same one who began it, that something else returned in their place, wearing their face, breathing their air. What that thing is, no one can say. A soul fractured and inverted, a shadow self long buried, or something far older, drawn through the mirror by attention and belief. Whatever it may be, it doesn't always go away. And once it sees the world through your eyes, it might not want to leave. So if you ever sit before a mirror in darkness, if you ever see your reflection blink before you do, don't speak, don't move, don't acknowledge it. Because acknowledgement is the invitation. And once you've given it that, it becomes real. And if you've made it this far, ask yourself, would you survive seeing your true soul? Or would it be the last thing you ever recognize? If this story haunted you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever looked into a mirror and felt like someone or something was looking back? I'd love to hear your theories and experiences. And if you want to hear more forbidden rituals and terrifying truths, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories waiting, and the next one may be closer than you think, because some mirrors never forget, and neither do the things staring out from the other side.